I looked directly at my father across the kitchen table and finally said the words I had been holding inside for years. If I hear one more comment from your wife about my money, there will be no more polite discussions. I will personally make it clear to her where she stands and why my money does not belong to her. The room fell quiet. The refrigerator buzzed in the background. My stepmother paused with her coffee cup halfway to her mouth. My father stared at me as if he no longer recognized his own daughter. That was the moment everything shifted. I grew up thinking families only broke apart loudly, with shouting, slammed doors, and arguments neighbors talked about. I never realized they could also fall apart quietly, one forced smile at a time, one carefully placed remark sliding under the table like a blade. My mother died when I was 15. Cancer. Fast, aggressive, unforgiving. One summer, she complained about a dull pain in her side. By winter, I was standing at her grave in borrowed black shoes that hurt my feet while people told me how strong I was. I hated that word. Strong meant you weren't allowed to fall apart. My father waited just under a year before introducing us to Linda. She wasn't openly cruel, and that was the issue. She smiled constantly, spoke gently, and touched my arm when she talked to me, as if we were already close. She brought casseroles to neighbors and wine to dinner parties. Everyone liked her. Everyone talked about how lucky my father was to find happiness again. I was 17 then, old enough to understand, young enough to stay silent. When I left for basic training 2 years later, my father hugged me tightly and said he was proud. Linda cried just enough to look supportive without ruining her makeup. "We'll take care of everything here," she said. "You focus on your future." I believed her, or maybe I needed to. The military taught me discipline, patience, and control. It taught me to listen more than I spoke, to read situations, and to wait. Those lessons helped me later, even though I didn't realize it at the time. The first comment about my money came during my second year of service. We were on a video call. Linda sat next to my father on the couch, her hand resting lightly on his knee, as if reminding everyone where she belonged. "You must be doing well now," she said with a smile. "With your pay, your housing allowance, all those bonuses." I shrugged and said I managed. "Well," she continued, "it's good to know the family has security." I didn't like how she said family. After that, the remarks continued. They were always polite, always framed as concern. Had I thought about long-term planning? Wouldn't it be easier if my father helped manage things since I was so young? Money could be overwhelming. Each time, my father nodded quietly and avoided my eyes. When I came home on leave, I noticed changes. My mother's desk was gone, replaced by a modern glass table that Linda said made the room feel cleaner. The old filing cabinet where my mother kept everything, from insurance documents to birthday cards, had disappeared. When I asked about it, Linda waved it off and said those old things had been organized and I didn't need to worry. I started worrying immediately. One evening after dinner, Linda brought out dessert and casually said we should talk about consolidating accounts because it made sense for families. I put my fork down and told her my accounts were fine. She smiled, unbothered, and said it was just a suggestion. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the faint outline on the wall where my mother's calendar used to hang. I felt like a visitor in a place that used to belong to me. The breaking point didn't involve shouting. It involved paperwork. While I was on duty, I received a bank notification by email. It was a routine security alert about an attempted access with incorrect verification. I froze. No one had my information except me. When I called the bank, they asked if I had recently authorized anyone to help manage my finances. I hadn't. They mentioned an inquiry linked to my father's address. Something inside me hardened. I went home on leave 2 weeks later. I didn't accuse anyone, and I didn't raise my voice. I observed. Linda talked more than usual about bills, investments, how expensive it was to maintain the house, and how my father deserved to relax after everything he had been through. Eventually, she said it plainly. "Well, your money is really part of this household anyway." I looked at my father. He didn't correct her. That was when I stood up, walked to the table, and calmly said the words that had been building inside me for years, clearly and without anger. "If I hear one more sentence from your wife about my money," I said while meeting his eyes, "there will be no more polite conversations. I will explain to her exactly where she stands and why my money is not hers. Do you understand? Linda's smile vanished. My father's face lost all color. He nodded, barely. But I already understood that understanding was not the same as respect, and respect was something I was finished asking for. I didn't expect everything to change overnight after that warning. People like Linda didn't pull back because they were confronted. They adapted. Their smiles tightened. They waited for a better opportunity. For a few weeks, things were quiet, too quiet. Linda stopped talking about money directly. Instead, she shifted to stories, long, winding conversations about stress, responsibility, and how difficult it was to hold everything together while I was away. She never asked for anything outright. She didn't need to. She let the suggestion linger in the air, heavy and unspoken. Meanwhile, my father seemed to shrink. I noticed it in how he deferred to her during conversations, how he glanced at her before answering even basic questions. I caught him changing direction mid-sentence because she shifted in her chair or cleared her throat. It was subtle, but once you noticed it, you couldn't ignore it. The military had taught me something important. Control doesn't always come from force. Often, it comes from conditioning. The next time Linda tested the boundary, it wasn't at home. It was at a family gathering, one of those long dinners where distant relatives showed up, acting closer than they really were. The kind with too much food, too much wine, and just enough time for old tensions to surface. I was sitting at the table when Linda laughed lightly and said to my aunt, "Well, with her military income, we're very lucky. Not many families have that kind of stability these days." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I didn't look at Linda. I looked at my father. He chuckled and said, "She's doing well." That was it. That was the opening. Later that night, I pulled him aside. We stood in the hallway outside my old bedroom, the door closed, the noise of conversation muted behind us. I told him calmly that I had set a boundary and she had crossed it. He rubbed his forehead and said she was just talking, that I was reading too much into it. I told him I was reading exactly what was there and that I was asking him once to handle it. He sighed and said I didn't understand how complicated things were. That sentence told me everything. Complicated usually meant excuses had already been made. A few days later, another bank alert came in. This time it wasn't an access attempt. It was a request for information related to beneficiaries. Someone had asked about the process for adding an authorized user. I didn't confront anyone. I documented everything: dates, times, comments, statements, emails, screenshots. I had learned long ago that emotions faded, but records didn't. Linda became bolder after that, mistaking my silence for giving in. She started framing her remarks as jokes. "Careful," she'd say with a laugh, "or she'll cut us off." People laughed. I didn't. One evening, she handed my father a stack of papers at the kitchen counter. "These are just estimates," she said sweetly. "I thought we could look at options together." I recognized the logo on the top page. It was my bank. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the house, the pipes knocking, the air conditioner clicking on and off. I stared at the ceiling and felt something settle inside me. Not anger, but clarity. The next morning, I went for a run before sunrise. The cold air burned my lungs, steady and grounding. With every step, I replayed everything I had seen, everything I had ignored, because it was easier than facing the truth. Linda didn't want help. She wanted control, and my father was allowing it. When I got back, Linda was already dressed, sipping coffee at the counter. She smiled at me as if nothing was wrong. "Morning," she said. "Sleep well?" "Fine," I replied. She tilted her head. "You've been quiet lately." I said, "I've been listening." Her smile faltered for just a moment. That afternoon, I made my first call, and it wasn't to my father or to Linda. I called the legal assistance office. I didn't give names at first. I laid out facts, hypotheticals, and situations. The officer listened carefully, then asked a question that tightened my stomach. Had I authorized any of this? No. Then you're right to be concerned. Not dramatic, not paranoid, validated. By the time I hung up, what I needed to do was becoming clear. I wasn't going to argue with Linda. I wasn't going to beg my father. And I wasn't going to wait for another boundary to be crossed. I was going to prepare. That evening, Linda tried one last time, soft and calculated. "You know," she said, placing a hand on my arm, "everything we do is for this family." I met her eyes and said, "My money isn't." Her hand dropped. She didn't respond, but as I walked away, I felt the shift. The realization that I wasn't just resisting anymore. I was no longer available to be managed. That frightened her more than anything I could have said. People like Linda didn't fear confrontation. They feared losing leverage. I didn't uncover the truth all at once. It came in pieces, ordinary details, that only became serious when put together. The first was a letter that wasn't meant for me. It arrived while I was back on base, forwarded from my father's address. The envelope had been opened, resealed poorly, then dropped into the outgoing mail like it didn't matter. Inside was a notice from a credit card company thanking my father for a recent inquiry about balance transfers and authorized users. The account name wasn't his. It was mine. I sat on the edge of my bunk, the paper trembling slightly in my hands, feeling that unmistakable chill crawl up my spine. Not fear, recognition. The kind you feel when something you suspected finally steps into the light and stares you in the face. I called the number on the letter immediately. The representative was calm, professional, precise. She confirmed what I already knew. Someone had used my personal information to request account access options. Not successfully, yet, but deliberately. "Is there a reason someone would think they're allowed to do that?" she asked. I thought of Linda's hand on my arm, my father's silence, the word family used like a key. "No," I said, "there isn't." That same afternoon, I locked everything down. New passwords, security questions, verbal passcodes, and flagged my accounts for heightened monitoring. The representative walked me through each step, her voice steady and reassuring. "You did the right thing by calling early," she said before hanging up. Early. That word lingered because it meant something worse could have happened if I hadn't acted. The next piece fell into place during my next visit home. I was searching for an old notebook my mother had kept, something familiar, when I checked the hall closet, the drawer beneath the phone, and finally, the small cabinet in the study. That's where I found the folder. It wasn't hidden. That was the mistake. It sat on the middle shelf, tucked between household manuals and tax returns, labeled neatly. Planning. Inside were printed emails, budget drafts, loan projections, a list of assets. My assets. My name appeared repeatedly, typed cleanly at the top of pages I had never seen. Notes in the margins referenced temporary transfers, family use, eventual consolidation. My throat went dry. I stood there, folding the folder open, listening to the sound of Linda moving around the kitchen, the clinking plates, water running, the ordinary soundtrack of a home that no longer felt like mine. One page stopped me cold, a handwritten note folded behind a spreadsheet. She won't say no forever. Once she understands responsibility, she'll see it's better this way. No signature. None needed. I closed the folder carefully, slid it back into place, and walked out silently. My hands were steady. My heart was not. At dinner that night, Linda spoke about rising costs, inflation, the uncertainty of the future. She spoke with the practiced cadence of someone laying groundwork, not asking permission. My father nodded along. I watched them both, thinking of all the years I had excused his quietness, his kindness, telling myself he was tired, grieving, trying to maintain peace. Peace, I realized, was expensive, and I was the one being asked to pay for it. Later, my father knocked on my door, standing awkwardly, hands in his pockets, eyes tired. "Your stepmother mentioned you seemed distant," he said. "I didn't invite him in." "I found the folder," I replied. He stiffened. "You went through our things." I explained I recognized my own name on plans I hadn't made. He exhaled slowly. "She was just thinking ahead. For whom? She worries about the house, about us." "And what about me?" He looked away. That was my answer. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting myself feel it. Not rage, not grief, but the dull ache of clarity. My father wasn't being manipulated. He was participating. The next morning, I called the fraud department again. This time, no hypotheticals. I described letters, inquiries, documents, the handwritten note, the address. The agent's tone shifted immediately. "Do not confront them," she said. "Continue documenting. We'll open a file." A file. Small, official, but carrying weight. By the time I returned to base, I had a system. I scanned every document, photographed handwritten notes, saved emails, and logged conversations. Dates, times, exact wording. I kept copies in 2 secure locations. I learned the laws relevant to my accounts, my state, my situation. The military had taught me to plan for contingencies, and now I did. Linda noticed the change before my father did. "You've been very busy," she said lightly during a phone call. "You barely tell us anything anymore." "I'm focused," I replied. "That's good," she said. "We all have to do our part." I almost laughed. Instead, I ended the call and added her words to my log. The final piece came unexpectedly. An email from a loan officer sent to me by mistake instead of my father. A simple apology followed by an attachment, a draft application listing expected future income, mine. That was when I knew. This wasn't overreach, it wasn't misunderstanding, it was strategy, and strategies could be dismantled. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake listening to the barracks, the rhythm of breathing, the hum of fluorescent lights, thinking of my mother, how careful she was, how she labeled everything, how she said preparation was a form of love. By morning, grief had sharpened into resolve. They thought my silence meant permission. They thought my distance meant ignorance. They were wrong. They were wrong. And soon, they were going to see just how wrong. I didn't change my behavior immediately. That would have been too obvious. People who assume control panic when they sense resistance, and panic makes them sloppy, but only if you first let them feel safe. So I stayed polite. I answered Linda's calls, responded to my father's messages, smiled during video chats, and spoke about work without sharing details. I asked about the house, their health, and other everyday things that made me seem engaged while revealing nothing. Inside, I was building something precise. Every morning before duty, I reviewed my notes, dates, times, statements, and the language Linda used when she thought she was subtle. The moments my father deferred instead of intervening. I treated it the way I'd been trained to handle intelligence: verify, corroborate, document. Emotion was useless, structure was everything. I opened a new account at a different bank, one my family had never used, redirected my deposits, placed alerts on all existing accounts, and froze my credit. Confirmation emails arrived. I archived them in a folder labeled simply evidence. I consulted legal assistance again, this time with specifics: names, documents, screenshots. The officer didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back, folded his hands, and said calmly, "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is attempted financial exploitation." Hearing it out loud stripped the last layer of doubt. This wasn't family tension. It was misconduct. "What are my options?" I asked. He outlined them clearly: civil remedies, protective measures, criminal escalation if necessary. He emphasized choice, control. "You decide how far this goes," he said. That night, I called the bank's fraud unit handling my case. I asked questions, learned procedures, timelines, what documentation carried weight and what didn't. Linda sent me a message while I was on the call, just checking in. "Your dad's been stressed. We're all worried about you." I saved it. The next step was the hardest, letting them think they were winning. I mentioned casually that managing everything alone was tiring. I let Linda hear uncertainty in my voice. She leaned in immediately. "You don't have to do this by yourself," she said gently. "Families share burdens." "I know," I replied. "I just don't know where to start." Her voice warmed. "Your father can help. We both can." That was when I knew she believed she'd won. Over the next few weeks, she pushed carefully. Suggestions, forms, comments about how much easier it would be if things were centralized. She framed it as support, but the paperwork told a different story. Each attempt went into my file. My father avoided my eyes whenever the topic came up. He never stopped her. That silence became part of the record. I began rehearsing the conversation I knew was coming, not emotionally, strategically. What I would say, what I wouldn't, where I would pause, and where silence would work for me. I chose the setting deliberately. A family dinner, neutral ground, witnesses close enough to matter, but not enough to turn it into theater. I didn't want spectacle. I wanted clarity. When the evening arrived, Linda was radiant, as she always was when she felt in control. She spoke about the future, stability, and how proud she was of me. Halfway through dessert, she brought it up. "We've been thinking," she said, glancing at my father, "maybe it's time to formalize some things." I set my spoon down. "What things?" I asked. She smiled. "Just safeguards in case anything happens." "To whom?" I pressed. She hesitated. "To all of us," I nodded slowly. "I've already safeguarded my accounts." Her smile faltered. "Oh yes," I said, "and I've spoken to my bank and legal assistants." The table went quiet. My father's face drained of color. Linda's eyes sharpened. "Why would you do that?" she asked, tone light but strained. Because someone tried to access my finances without my authorization, I said evenly. She laughed softly. That sounds dramatic. It's documented, I replied. Silence. I warned you. I turned to my father. I set a boundary. He swallowed. We were just trying to help. You were trying to decide for me, I said. There's a difference. Linda leaned back, expression cooling. You're overreacting. No, I said. I'm prepared. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse or threaten. I simply made it clear that the version of me who stayed quiet was gone. After dinner, Linda tried to corner me in the kitchen. You're making this into something ugly, she said sharply. It already was, I replied. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. She stared, calculating. You think you have power here? I know I do, I said. That was the first time she looked afraid. She understood what my father hadn't. I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't emotional. I was methodical. And methodical people don't stop once they start. The dinner had been Linda's idea, framed as a gesture of reconciliation. That should have been my first clue. People who wrong you don't usually seek peace unless they're trying to regain ground. She suggested inviting extended family and an aunt. I barely spoke to a cousin who always asked invasive questions and a few family friends who remembered me as a quiet kid. It'll be nice, Linda said on the phone. A chance to reconnect. We're all under so much stress lately. Stress, another word she used when she meant leverage. I agreed immediately. That pause before her response told me everything. Good, she said. I'll make your favorite. I didn't correct her. She never remembered what that was. The evening arrived crisp and cool, a fall night that made the house smell like roasted vegetables and cinnamon. Linda had set the table meticulously, candles spaced evenly, her fine china arranged like a stage. She wore a cream-colored sweater that made her look soft and approachable. My father hovered near the sink, drying the same glass over and over. Guests arrived in clusters, coats and chatter filling the hallway. Hugs were exchanged, compliments offered, someone mentioning how proud they were of me serving my country. Linda seized the opening. She's doing very well, she said brightly. We're so grateful. Not many families have that kind of security. There it was again. I caught my father's eye. He looked away. Dinner unfolded slowly. Stories, laughter, the clink of silverware. Linda steered the conversations effortlessly, circling back to responsibility, planning, and the importance of thinking ahead. I waited. It came during dessert. So, my aunt said, smiling at me, do you plan to stay in the military long term? Maybe, I replied. I like what I do. Linda nodded. And with that kind of income, she'll have so many options. I set my fork down. What kind of options? I asked. She blinked. Well, investing, helping family, making sure everyone's taken care of. The table grew quiet, not tense, just curious. I reached into my bag and placed a slim envelope on the table between us. Linda's eyes dropped to it immediately. What's that? She asked. A summary, I said, of recent activity connected to my finances. My father stiffened. Linda laughed lightly. Is this really the time? I think it's the perfect time, I replied. I didn't open the envelope or slide papers across the table. I let it sit, its presence heavier than anything inside. I've been contacted by my bank, I continued calmly. There have been multiple attempts to access my accounts, requests for information, draft applications, none of them authorized. The room went still. My aunt looked between us, uncertain. Someone cleared their throat. That sounds like a mistake, Linda said quickly. Not like this, I said. Not repeatedly. My father finally spoke. We can talk about this later. I'm comfortable talking about it now, since it's already been discussed publicly, I said. Linda's jaw tightened. I've opened a file, I continued. With the fraud department, I've consulted legal assistance. The shift was immediate. Linda's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass, taking a sip, then another. Her smile was now rigid. This is unnecessary, she said. We're family. Exactly why it matters, I replied. No one spoke. The candles flickered. I turned to my father. I warned you. I set a boundary. It was crossed. He stared down at his plate. I'm not accusing anyone tonight, I said. I'm informing you. There'll be a meeting soon with professionals. We'll discuss what happens next. Linda leaned back, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the calculation beneath. You're threatening us. No, I said. I'm giving you clarity. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze, forced, awkward conversation. Guests avoided my eyes. When they finally began to leave, Linda hugged them tightly, her smile never wavering. To anyone watching, it looked like a successful evening. After the last car pulled away, Linda turned on me. "You humiliated me," she hissed. "I told the truth," I replied. "You did this on purpose?" "Yes." My father stood between us, shoulders slumped. "Can we just calm down?" "I am calm," I said. "That's the point." Linda laughed, sharp and brittle. "You think you've won something?" "I think you understand now," I said, "and that's enough for tonight." She stared at the envelope still on the table. "What's in it?" "You'll see," I said. "At the meeting." She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Once leverage is exposed, it stops working. And Linda knew it. The meeting was scheduled for 9 on a Tuesday. Not at the house, not at a cafe. Neutral ground. An office with glass walls and neutral art designed to keep emotions from staining the furniture. I chose it deliberately. Emotions blur edges. Paper sharpens them. My father arrived first, looking older than he had a week earlier, shoulders hunched, his tie tight as if to remind himself he still controlled something. He nodded stiffly when I entered. Linda arrived exactly 3 minutes late, wearing a dark blazer and heels that clicked sharply against the floor, announcing herself as if this were still a stage she could command. She smiled at the receptionist, at the framed certificates on the wall, at everyone except me. We sat. The mediator introduced herself, then the attorney I had retained, a quiet, precise woman who spoke only when necessary. I noticed Linda watching her hands instead of her face. That told me something. "Let's begin," the mediator said. I didn't speak first. Linda did. "This is all very dramatic," she said lightly. "We're here because of a misunderstanding." My attorney slid a folder across the table. "It's documented," she said. Linda's smile tightened. The mediator cleared her throat. "Perhaps we should start with the facts." So we did. Timeline, dates, attempted access, unauthorized inquiries, draft applications, the handwritten note, the collateral listing expected future income, mine. Each item presented calmly, methodically. No accusations, no raised voices. Just facts. My father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Linda shifted in her chair, crossing and uncrossing her legs. "This doesn't prove intent," she said. "People plan, families plan for other people's money." My attorney didn't pause. Silence filled the room. The mediator turned to me. "What outcome are you seeking?" I took a breath. I had rehearsed this, not the exact words, but the steadiness. "First," I said, "a formal acknowledgement that my finances are mine alone. No shared access, no inquiries, no future planning without my written consent." Linda opened her mouth, then closed it. "Second," I continued, "a signed statement confirming that any prior attempts to access or leverage my accounts were unauthorized." My father flinched. "Third," I said, "a commitment that my name, income, and expected future earnings will not be used in any financial discussions, applications, or representations going forward." Linda leaned forward. "And if we don't agree?" I met her eyes. "Then the fraud file moves forward." The room went quiet. My father finally spoke. "You'd do that to us?" I looked at him. "I already did it, to protect myself." He rubbed his face with both hands. "We were just trying to make things easier." "For whom?" I asked. He didn't answer. The mediator interjected gently. "There are alternatives to escalation, settlement, boundaries." "That's what I'm offering," I said. Linda laughed softly. "You're enjoying this." "No," I replied. "I'm ending it." She turned to my father. "You're going to let her do this?" He hesitated. That hesitation, the space where he should have defended me years ago, was all the confirmation I needed. My attorney placed another document on the table. "This outlines the terms," she said. "If signed, no further action will be taken." Linda scanned the page quickly. "This limits us," she said sharply. "It protects me," I replied. "And what about family?" she demanded. "Family doesn't require access to my accounts," I said. She looked at my father. "Say something." He swallowed. "Linda, maybe we should just sign." Her head snapped toward him. "After everything I've done for you?" The mediator raised a hand. "Let's keep this productive." Linda leaned back, her composure cracking. "You're choosing her over me." My father stared at the table. "I'm choosing to stop this from getting worse." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "You always do this. You retreat." I watched them detached, as if observing a pattern finally visible from the outside. "I'm not asking you to choose sides," I said. "I'm drawing a line." The mediator slid the pen across the table. Linda didn't reach for it. My father did. "Wait," she said. "If we sign this, what happens?" "The matter ends here," my attorney replied, "provided there are no further violations." Linda's fingers curled into her palm. "And if we don't, then the documentation is forwarded," I said. "Really?" She looked at me, for the first time without calculation. "You think you're so disciplined?" she asked quietly. "So controlled." "I am," I replied. "That's why this works." She turned away, jaw tight. My father signed first. The sound of the pen on paper was louder than I expected. Linda stared at the document, then snatched the pen and signed with a sharp, angry stroke. The mediator collected the papers. "Thank you," she said. "We'll finalize this." As we stood, my father lingered. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "Not today." Linda walked past us without a word, her heels echoing down the hallway, each step heavy with something like defeat. Outside, the air was cool and clear. I took a breath and felt something loosen inside me. Not relief exactly, but completion. I hadn't won, I had concluded. Sometimes that was better. The silence afterward was unfamiliar, not the awkward kind after arguments, nor the brittle quiet when someone refuses to apologize. This was clean, unoccupied, like a space cleared of furniture you never chose in the first place. I returned to base 2 days later. The drive was long, stretching through flat highways and early morning fog. I kept the radio off. I wanted to hear my own thoughts, to test how they sounded now that I wasn't constantly defending myself in my head. They were quieter. My father sent one message that week, just a few words. "I hope you're okay." I didn't respond. Not out of anger. Anger requires energy I no longer wanted to give. But hope without accountability was just avoidance. I had spent years filling in gaps for him. I was done. Linda didn't reach out at all. I later learned, through a relative who still shared updates, that she was telling people I had become cold, that the military had changed me, that I had turned money into something ugly. I let her have that story. People like Linda needed narratives. They needed to be wronged, misunderstood, diminished. I didn't need to correct her. Anyone who mattered had already seen enough. What surprised me most was how little I missed the house. I'd expected grief, nostalgia, a sense of loss for the house where I'd grown up. But when I reflected, the house I missed hadn't existed for a long time. Not since my mother died. Everything after that had been a version edited by someone else. On my first free weekend back, I drove to the cemetery. It was quiet, the grass neatly trimmed, the headstones catching the afternoon light. I brought nothing. No flowers, no prepared words. I didn't need them. I stood in front of my mother's grave and spoke softly. I handled it. I didn't let them take what wasn't mine. I thought about the girl I had been when she died, how desperate I'd been to keep things together, how willing I was to disappear to make space for other people's comfort. I wished I could tell her that it hadn't been weakness, just youth, just love misdirected. I learned how to say no, I said, and how to mean it. The wind moved through the trees, gentle and steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for permission to breathe. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. My finances stayed exactly where they belonged. My name stayed off everything that wasn't mine. The fraud file was closed, marked resolved. The folder labeled evidence went into storage. Untouched, not a threat, just a reminder. My father tried once more a few months later. A voicemail this time. He sounded tired, older. "I should have protected you. I didn't. I'm sorry." I listened twice, then archived it. Apologies didn't rebuild trust. They acknowledged damage after it was done. I wasn't cruel enough to deny him reflection, but I wasn't obligated to resume a relationship simply because he finally understood the cost of his silence. Some lessons arrive late. That didn't make them my responsibility. The military gave me structure. My mother gave me values. And this experience, unwanted, exhausting, necessary, gave me something else entirely. Boundaries. Not walls, not punishments, just clear lines drawn with intention. I didn't walk away with satisfaction. There was no victory lap, no dramatic triumph. What I gained was quieter, ownership of my life. Understanding that respect didn't require permission, and that being difficult was sometimes just another word for refusing to be used. Most of all, I learned that family isn't defined by access. It's defined by care. And real care never needs to be extracted. If this story resonated with you, If you've ever had to draw a line where one didn't exist before, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment, share where you're watching from, or which part of this story stayed with you. We share stories like this every day. Stories about boundaries, resilience, and finding your footing again. If you don't want to miss the next one, subscribe and stay with us. Let's keep walking this path together.